From Trauma to Truth, One Woman's Journey. We're going to explore various aspects of living with an alcoholic sociopath, or just a sociopath. It just happens that the one that I got to live with, the one that I got to spend 20 years with, was an alcoholic sociopath. But I sort of concluded towards the end of our relationship that maybe the alcoholism wasn't the key factor in his personality traits. So it's about the things that we experience on a day-to-day basis living with a sociopath, and what these things look like and how they can be really hidden and hard to see and even harder to confront. But little by little, if you start to recognize them, then you can make a change and do something about it. In this episode, we're going to talk about family and friends. So what happens to your family and friends, your relationship with your family and friends? How can that change as a result of living with a sociopath? We're going to look at one story from my life, just that focuses around that topic, and explore what that meant to me and how that affected my life, and really how it affected how I am today. So as a part of this, I'm actually going to read from the book. So we met in Sydney, which is where I lived most of my life. My family lived there. I had a group of friends there. We didn't have a house, like we rented, so we weren't tied into property. Both of my children were born there. So I had life, mainly in Sydney. That was where I was and where I grew up. When my eldest was 10 years old, my alcoholic sociopath decided it was time to leave Sydney and move to Queensland. Now, there was a really good reason for that, and that was that we had managed to purchase a property from his mum, and it was a bit of it gave us a financial benefit because we didn't have to pay her for the property up front. We were basically paying her off for the property over time. So I wasn't overly keen to move, but at the same time, I didn't consider this to be a situation where he was trying to take me away from anything. I just actually thought that it was a good move. It meant that we could own a house and, all that sort of thing. And being that seems to be one of the general goals of us as Australians, I was like, okay, let's do this. And so he left Sydney about 4 months before I did, and went up to renovate and work on the property. So, and then the kids moved up, and then I moved up. So as we wrapped everything up in Sydney, we then moved up to Queensland. When I arrived at our new house, I was amazed. It was like a dream come true. I absolutely loved the house. I loved what he'd done with it. Like in Sydney, we lived on a main road, so there was the constant sound of traffic. But in this place, in this sort of country town in Queensland, we lived on a dead-end street. The worst noise that there was were birds, really loud birds that would wake up at the crack of dawn. But other than that, there was no sound to be heard. And the back veranda looked over this dead, dense forest that was just like paradise. And then, so when we moved in, I didn't know anybody particularly there. I was a bit concerned about the pace of life and what it was going to be like. But then as I was after I'd been there for a few months, I realized that there were some people that I had actually met in Sydney that had moved to Queensland and not far from where we had purchased this house. And so we started meeting up on a regular basis, and I actually ended up with this amazing network of people around me. I'd actually never had it before. In Sydney, my friends, everyone was always busy. We were just always flat chat, running around. We had the kids, buddy bar. And so although I had friends, I didn't see them a lot. We didn't spend a lot of time together, all that sort of thing. Whereas for some reason, like, I don't know, I think Queensland's a bit slower than sort of Sydney, slower paced and all that sort of thing. And so we started actually meeting up on a regular basis, and I actually formed this friend network. And it was quite something. It was, it filled me and made me feel whole. It's actually, when I look back on my life with my alcoholic sociopath and all the different things, the phases that we went through and the houses that we lived in and all that sort of thing, this particular section of my life was the happiest time that I can remember. I had a job that I enjoyed, I had friends, I had this house that I loved. The pace was completely different to Sydney. There was community, like we had neighbors and that you could go and talk to and get to know and all that sort of stuff. It was, in Sydney, none of that happens. You just sort of live your own life and you're surrounded by people and yet you're alone. So I just loved it in this place. I felt supported, I felt comfortable, I felt protected. And it was a feeling that I'd never had before. It was quite something. So then after living there for about 12 months, my alcoholic sociopath decided that it was time for us to sell up and relocate. And I'm just like, why? I love it here. I don't want to move. And so the campaign started. So, and by that I mean, he would, if he wanted to achieve something for which I was not in agreement with, he would go on a mission in order to change my mind. So every conversation that we had would circle back to aspects of the move that he thought that I might think were positive. For example, he would talk about, the place that he was looking to move, what the highlights of that were, how that would be really beneficial for me, what the new house might be like, all this sort of stuff, right? In an effort to try and sway me to come to the conclusion that what he was saying made sense and that we should do that. And then he would enlist the kids. So this was a normal thing, right? This I don't know that we'd ever had something of such magnitude before that we needed to agree upon in order to move forward. But in the past it might have just been, do we go to the pool or the beach? I don't know. And then he would enlist, like, for whatever he wanted the outcome to be, he would enlist the kids to work on me to get me to agree. So he spoke to the kids about the activities in the area that he wanted to move to, scouts, swimming, sports, things that they could do there that he knew that he could get them excited about, so that they would start working on me to help in his, outcome of getting me to move and be okay to sell this place that I absolutely loved. So in the end, could I have stood my ground on this? I'm going to say not really. So you have to understand that my alcoholic sociopath had all the power. Mine wasn't violent. Most of the time he didn't even yell at me, but over the years I had learnt that there was only one outcome, only one way that things could ever go, and that was his way. He was completely uninterested in my feelings and needs. All that mattered was his agenda. So I never agreed. I never wanted to sell the house. I never even threw up my hands and went, all right, take it away. In the end, his compromise was that he said, well, why don't we just put it on the market and see what happens? Let's see if we get any interest, because, I don't know, maybe there will be no interest, and we'll ask a ridiculously high price and we'll just see what happens. And so to that I said, okay. And although I still didn't want it to happen, I was like, okay, let's do that. So within a week of listing our property, we had 2 offers, both for asking price, one without any inspections or fuss. And that was that. As I've been moving through, I've sort of been reading some stuff and ad-libbing some other stuff, because obviously as I read it, I become, it all comes back to me, flooding back. But I'm just going to read the last section of this section of the book and this section of my story. So to cut a long story short, he couldn't find a house in the town he wanted to live in. And so he ended up buying a new house, which was an hour away from the old one, or just over an hour away. It ended up being just far enough away that I needed to get a new job and fell out of contact with most of my friends. I still spoke to them on the phone, but I couldn't be there to go to the movies or hit the town or have dinner. I was far enough away that I felt isolated. When I look back on this part of my life, I believe that my isolation was his end goal. If I was not supported outside of the marriage, then my only support was him. He wanted me to be reliant on him only, because this was the best way to ensure I would never leave him. Just to prove this point, one of his comments to me after I did leave was, "I only let you leave." Just let that sink in for a minute. "I only let you leave because I knew you wouldn't survive without me." Just let that sink in. "I only let you leave because I knew you wouldn't survive without me." So obviously I did survive without him. I survived very well, in fact, without him. But this is just a story of the lengths that my alcoholic sociopath went to remove me from my family and friends, and to isolate me, and to make me feel like I had no community, no connections, just him. And that did make it harder for me to leave in the end. It did make it harder for me to make the break I needed to make, because I was so far away from anything I knew previously in, previous sections of my life, that I became stuck. And the prospect of leaving or moving away was such a big thing to get my head around, and to organize and implement and all that sort of thing. So that's my first story. I've got lots more stories to tell. I would love to get your feedback, to hear your comments, to know if there's anything that you have experienced that is similar, where you got moved away from everything that you knew and loved. And let's get strong together. See you next time.